Five, four, three, two, one. Welcome back to another episode of Enter the Flozone podcast. I'm your host, Sumit Chatterjee. How you guys been doing? Man, there's a lot that's been happening right now, and yeah, just really invested in my own growth for right now, man. I've been doing a lot of shadow work, and yeah, just coming out of the other side is always an interesting journey. On the other side, we have JD. JD connects the dots. He connects ideas to people and people to events, and he's a conduit. He helps people to really tap in and find their truth. So, how are you doing today, brother? Great to connect.
I'm a variety of things. I'm definitely happy. I'm immensely grateful for being invited onto your platform. I finally get a chance to tap in and kick it with the flow master himself. So
Thank you, brother.
I'm sure this is gonna be an adventure to say the least. I'm glad you sounded the gong because I feel like we're in the ring now.
Yeah, we've entered the ring for sure. Entered the flow zone. Yeah, man. So basically, tell me about what you're up to right now, and also what led you up to this point. Like, tell people a little brief of your background and what led you on this industry, this path, and your idea.
Oh gosh. Yeah, no, let's start at the beginning, as they say there, right? For me, this journey started in childhood. I was a very busy child, and I had the blessing of parents who made me believe that I could do anything I put my mind to. And so, as a result of that, and a result of just the lifestyle that they led, which was one that was very civics focused, I've always been heavily involved in initiatives of some sort, right? So, which is not to say that I didn't have time to watch cartoons, but my first friends were books. And if I wasn't, involved at home or at church, I was probably involved in something that was centered on the community. And so as a result of that, the premise of being a part of something that is larger than yourself was instilled pretty early in life, right? Beyond that, I would say that there's a general awareness of, once again, the interconnectedness of things and people that always has made sense to me. And so I always really focus my attention towards that because it's always interested me. That manifested itself in various ways um, through, adulthood, whether it be in my university. I was always involved in some form of advocacy. Um, and that set the tone for a career in public health, social work, community engagement. And so that led the bulk of my 20s. And it wasn't a bad track by any stretch. It took me around the world a couple times. And that's when I learned that the best NGOs and nonprofits function like businesses. Also, I'm from the United States. I'm more of a corporation than anything else. And so it sort of behooves you to understand how that machine functions. And so I would say in my mid to late 20s, I set about in my mid 20s, I set about bridging those two worlds, right? And that is around the time where I met my now team. And ironically enough, I shifted from working in, the public sector in Washington, DC, in like the government space, just the cradle of administration, bureaucracy, and to a certain extent, thinly veiled egotism, but that's another conversation, or at least another part of this one. Right? I left that and decided to create or co-create rather Mastermind Connect, which is an LLC based out of New York City. And our goal was pretty simple, just redefining manhood. Uh, I think not only at a conceptual level, but like its application as well. I think so much of what has defined us as men has lied between two factors. Those two factors are your legs. And so genitalia and the way that we present, especially more so within a rigid binary context, comes with it its own implications. And so the model that we have for penis people um, has always been very, very limiting, especially when you take into account just the myriad of layers and experiences that go into making a full human, right? And that began the process of finding ways to do conscientious business, and also just the simple fact that business is itself shadow work. And so when you bring people together with the understanding that they need healing, whether or not you intend to do the healing, you're going to end up doing the healing, because you can't give what you do not have. And so I think the work highlighted a very long list of blind spots that we as people had, leader or otherwise. And so that led to us doing a lot of emphasis on the shadow work that you mentioned earlier, um, financial literacy, physical fitness, mental health, of course, the emotional stability piece, and being the hub from which all of these spokes go out, and just writing an entire, revenue model around all of it, because you got to support, your initiatives must support themselves. Otherwise, it just becomes charity. And that led us to replicate that same model with youth programming. And now we pretty much have 2 kids that we run behind to keep track of. And that's been a better part of the last 5 to 6 years. And now here we are today, kicking it with you.
Incredible, man. What a journey. What a journey. And to find that bridge, that's a tough thing, right? To be able to definitely, bring, it's almost like bringing in the two hemispheres of the brain.
Hmm.
And yeah, that's
Or
really
the two poles of, masculine energy and feminine, because you operate within them all day, every day.
totally, totally. Yeah, we could give them as many dualities as we want, right? Like sun and moon, and we could keep going. But yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
it's powerful, man. That's kind of interesting because I always try and find the sweet spot in everything. Like I try to find the midpoint, which is the flow state, right? That that Venn diagram that crosses over. Like what is the overlap between these two areas? Like that's always been my interest. And so
Mm,
like
mm.
yeah, it's great that you that you brought that to our attention today. Man, so talk to me about this idea of redefining masculinity. First of all, let's give it a definition. Like what would be your definition of masculinity?
Um, my definition of masculinity is, I mean, I would say masculinity is whatever the person expressing it at the time says it is, and not so many words. However, you do have some alignment with the classical structure. So usually structure, order, protection, safety, however you want to assign that, it may change its expression, but typically it's a lot that is associated with the left hemisphere of the brain.
Right. Awesome, man. And what would you say is this term of, let's say, the divine masculine? How would, because culture's brought this term up, right? It's been sort of conglomerated through the
Oh,
collective.
it's always been around. It's always been around. Like you don't Shakti doesn't get to create unless Shiva wrecks shit first.
Mhm.
You typically need the forest fire to release nutrients so that the forest itself can prosper as it grows back. So the divinity in it is just full awareness. Um, I know over here in the West, over the last few years, the phrase toxic masculinity has been all the rage, to which I offer, I don't know that it's masculinity that's toxic. I think it's the absence of it. If you really study how ancient cultures embraced both of these polarities in this context being masculinity and femininity, you will see that they had a completely different methodology and approach. And so what we see today is just an overabundance of immature masculine expression. And it's so abundant that it has caused us to misconstrue what masculinity really is. And a lot of that is just really based on the fact that we've limited it to just men in particular, among other things. We generally have a lack of understanding of what masculinity is because our understanding of what men are supposed to be and our this odd cultural need and fascination with trying to align men and masculine has caused a lot of us to miss the mark.
Interesting. Yeah, very true. And the idea of these two different polarities that you said earlier. I mean, you mentioned it being very ancient, or the fact that it's always been there, right? So
Mm-hmm.
and back in the days they had initiations and rituals and things like this, right? Not these pseudo initiations like these and all these kinds of things where
Yeah, losing your virginity, getting your first fight, going to school, maybe having a kid, like all of those are, they're symbols and side effects.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm, definitely, man. And yeah, I think that that's just powerful to be able to get to that construct, or at least understand it on a deeper level, right? Because it's like it can be so much, right? And we can add so much information on it. But I think that primarily, and also a bit of a background for the people, where I met JD is through this program from Jose. He brought all of us together, this brotherhood, intentional impact. And so
Yeah, through modern Renaissance, man.
modern Renaissance, man, exactly. And that's an interesting topic by itself too, like the whole polymath idea. I think that's really cool as well. uh
There, listen, I mean, all of us are.
mhm, right, because we see, like, let's say Tony Robbins, and he's able to do a bunch of things at once, but then culture has this narrative of like you can only do one thing and you can only have one purpose, and however, I think that the polymath is the integrator, is the juggler, right, of these both of these worlds, or maybe more than one world, right? All these different dimensions together. And so they
Yeah, man.
are the multi-dimensional man in a sense. So yeah.
Well, we create our own multiverses, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are multiverses inherently in our existence, and so to speak back to the divinity piece, it is to primarily become aware, and then secondarily connect with. I think that tertiary level, um, unite with, and so that in that unison, like that's where you get into the embodiment piece. And I think as guys in general, or anyone, like even women who carry a lot of masculine energy, there's a tendency to sort of sit in your head, and so you view the entire world through the lens of your frontal lobe, and it's all about what you think, which, no shade on thinking, it's a very healthy practice. I heavily encourage you to engage in it. It is simply not the end all be all, as most of your wisdom is a couple notches down. It's in here. You have multiple brains. There's a brain in your head, there's a brain in your heart, there's a brain in your gut. The divinity in any piece is the union of all three.
Powerful, man. So that is the divinity factor, is the synergy of all three, like the connection of all three. Yeah.
Holy Trinity, fam.
Mm. That's cool. So basically, we were talking a little bit earlier about this shift in the collective consciousness. Like the term put onto it is like 5D, right? So
Mm-hmm.
essentially, there is clearly something happening. There's new awareness that's taking place. So what is your perspective about what's happening right now, and what exactly is changing, what old patterns are crumbling, and if you can give your uh I know that's a lot. It's a lot.
How much time do you have? Because that is a very multifaceted answer.
Right.
Um, But now let me let you finish your question to make sure I understand what I feel you're asking me.
Right. So I want to know your interpretation of what's happening in terms of 3D to 5D, and if you could uh, maybe also give people a bit of an understanding of those terms, and so they can easily apply it right to their lives in some way.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, 3D speaks to the three dimensions, you know, length, width, height, up, down, right, left, everything in this tangible level of relativity that we currently exist in physically. Um, 5D is just adding, a bit more detail to it. So rather than
My bad. I think I accidentally muted you.
nah, yeah, you tried to mute everybody and you just ended up muting me. It's fine. Got caught up in your dragon head. Um, but yeah, so 5D is when you get into more so like the inner space. And so it's not just the depth, which is another dimension, but it's it's the depth within as opposed to measuring the depth of like the volume of an ocean. You know what I mean? And so when you get into more dimensions, you realize that the rules that we created to make sense of the natural phenomena that we can observe, natural phenomena that we can observe, um, they don't necessarily go out the window. They just apply differently or less. And in some cases, go out of the window. So if you are in Hyderabad, India, you're on Earth. It's a different part of Earth, maybe a bit more humid. Maybe there's a bit more smoke in the air because no one requires vehicles that have catalytic converters. But at the end of the day, the same basic rules of physics based on Sir Isaac Newton's laws come into play. Gravity still works there, right? Now, if we were to go 50,000 miles straight up into the air, well, now we're around the stratosphere. Like, go beyond that, everything that we thought we understood about how the world was supposed to work may not necessarily apply anymore. There's no up or down in space. There's just space. Space just is, and it behaves on a completely different set of rules, most of which we don't understand. I would wager that our spirit functions in the same capacity, um, because once again, we are multiverses, right?
Yeah,
And so we're simply just moving away from some Earth shit into some intergalactic stuff. And so when you leave the surface of any given planet, the rules that dictate the surface of that planet do not necessarily apply to the space that the planets inhabit.
got it. And I think that's where, like, I've seen a lot of people talk about like the Newtonian paradigm and then the quantum paradigm, right? So it's like
Exactly.
the newer, yeah, just newer lens, or we're like wearing new lens to see the world almost. Yeah, that's really powerful, man. Let's get intergalactic up in here.
Let's do it, Space Sage. Hold on, let me get some water up with me. I'm watching you and I'm feeling convicted because I got to drink a whole nother one of these today.
Man, yeah, water is so important. Guess it hydrates the brain cells, you know.
And that's it. Plus, you got pictures of water on your wall. You know what I mean? Everything's blue.
It's a subliminal hit.
Okay, listen, you got to put the medicine in the candy. All right.
Mm, I like that. The medicine and the candy.
All right. So, what we got next?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk specifically about, how you maintain your own flow state, whatever you want to call it, spidey senses, the zone, right?
Yeah.
Being tapped in. How do you experience flow, and how do you get into flow personally?
Whew. I experience flow quite pleasantly because I love flow. Um, I've always been the type of person for whom, well, number one, I grew up near the ocean, so that coastal energy is definitely um, a part of me to the point where like I love the state of Colorado. I think it's beautiful, It's just too landlocked. There's no ocean. So that's a big thing for me. But like in my more impatient days, which is not to say that I don't have any moments of impatience now. They're just few and far between, right? But in my more consistently impatient years, um, I would drive 5 miles out of my way. It meant that I could avoid stopping for traffic. I don't like things to be. That's why, ironically enough, traffic in Asia is just like, no, either I'll walk or ride a moto or just like give me a helicopter. I can't stand to be in a car. It's as many people. There's not enough space. Freaks me out. Unless I'm stoned, in which case I don't care. But I think with the flight piece for me, it is currently embracing the submission to the process, right? The way I see it at my best, I am essentially a radio transmitter, right? It is maintaining the strength of my signal connection, keeping that 5G connection to whatever the universe is communicating to me, because it is my understanding that it always is. We are not always present. Thus, the universe uses other methods to get our attention first. But words are, yeah, we're talking words and basic language that we love to hang on to so much. That's back to 3D, right? It's kind of ghetto. The reality of the situation is, it's through nature. The wind, birds, the insects that annoy you and crawl on your leg, right? Like that is all of that for me is getting my attention. And so for me, it's being mindful enough to know how to, or more accurately, when to control my pace, whether that is the pace of my breathing. I know if I'm not mindful of what my heartbeat feels like, I'm quite literally not listening to my heart. So I'm probably getting caught up here too much. So I need to repivot. Case in point, earlier today, we tried to tap in. I was fresh off of a nap, and I forced myself to stay horizontal a bit longer, because I could tell that most of my downtime was really just my brain running in circles, just cycling off, the story we sell ourselves, so that we can continue to feed ourselves these stress hormones that, whether or not we want to admit it, we're kind of addicted to. Many of us actually don't know how to function in a non-distressed state.
Mm-hmm.
Emphasize on distress, because stress can be useful. Now, stress itself is simply a thing, and we do, it has spectra, parts of that full spectrum, like anything else, much like joy and sadness. It's all the same energy, just have different connotations and different applications. But sorry, excuse me. To finally answer your question directly, um, how I maintain flow state is a combination of awareness, and also practice. So I begin the first part of most of my days, um, giving thanks. I honor my ancestors often, because I am a practitioner of a tradition that not only mandates that we do so, it's much less about you having to follow rules and more so the acknowledgement that, we stand on the shoulders of giants. And so, in addition to that advantage and that protection energetically, there is wisdom that is already available in your DNA that you just need to tap into. Um, and that same logic applies towards many aspects of life. And so far, it's served me pretty well.
That's powerful, man, because you take every single like movie or storyline that's out there, right? It's always the character coming back to themselves, right? And that's like a big theme in our in our own lives. It's like we build this ego through childhood, and then we learn to let it go. Like it's this wild process, and I think that
Yeah.
it's uh it's very interesting that you brought up the fact of gratitude, because we are basically, yeah, tapping into what is already there, what is already present. And
Yep.
so that's a feeling, it's not a thinking, like you said. And for a lot of
You
us,
can't think your way into feeling. Nah, you can't.
exactly, yeah.
Doesn't work that way.
Exactly. And also what you said about trusting, I believe you used the word submission into the process or trusting the submission. Could you go into that a little bit more? That's an interesting concept to me because of this idea that we have of surrender to this, higher power in a sense, but also it's giving up predictive control for process control, right? So it's like not trying.
You just answered your question. That was it. Yeah, nah, that because the predictive, that's satisfying a need, and every need, like Bob Marley said, every need has an ego to feed. So if there's a need, there's an attachment, right? I am attached to the idea of what this looks like in my mind's eye, and usually there's a trauma attached to that. I experienced something and or some things which left such an indelible mark on me that I still hold on to, that I by any means refuse to feel like that ever again. Thus, things need to look this way. Otherwise, I relive that experience and now no longer present, because the mind is, it works off of comparisons. The mind is 3D. The mind is only going to cycle and recycle what already has been. It's going to take you into the past. It's not that good at creating something that does not exist yet because it has a frame of reference for it. And so, like you just said, it's a feeling part. You can't look your way through the darkness unless you have night vision. For the most part, you got to feel your way out.
Mm, yeah, totally. I've always been very interested in this idea of how cultures represent this like scarcity paradigm through their own religions, things like this, which is yeah, it goes really deep. One thing that I think is very powerful is to point out like the seven deadly sins, and the
Hmm.
fact of like how each of them is almost like from a lack, right? It's like lust is not enough sex, greed is not enough money, right? It's like it keeps going, and I think that that lack is
No, about to say it's all different ways of expressing the same frequency, right? Just different applications.
exactly right.
Because
And
I know plenty of greedy people that have a lust for whatever they're greedy for,
mhm.
and it still ties into gluttony, money hungry, lust for life.
mm, yeah, it all ties together. It's like this.
Yeah, but scarcity, I think that's the perfect encapsulation for it, right? Because at a certain level, you feel there's not enough, and that's why you have to take everyone else's gag. At that is there are no others. The bigger gag with that is there's more than enough for everybody.
Yep. And you also mentioned the fact that how when people get hurt. So you were talking about this idea of immature masculinity, right? And yeah, I would say that a lot of toxic masculinity is actually wounded masculinity, right? It's like people have been hurt.
Which ironically enough is like highly, in more cases than not, I found it involves a very fractured relationship to the divine feminine.
Mm, interesting. Can you speak into that a little bit more? What do you mean by that?
Well, yeah, I mean, like we talk a lot about women and daddy issues, and there are also men with daddy issues, so they have or just they have very ill-fated relationships, um, or have had ill-fated relationships as it relates to other men. So they double up on the protective qualities of masculinity, right? And then also like they've been hurt by a woman in some part. Either way, it comes down to not feeling safe. Ironically enough, a lot of that has to do with like a lot of low chakra shit. So like you learn to not trust your gut, but you will double down on the primal aspects of instinct, because that reptilian brain developed a long time ago for a reason. Something is trying to get me. I'm either gonna I'm gonna stand and fight, or in some cases, there's that fight, flight, and also fawning. So I may just freeze. Either way, it's a reaction to lack of safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I once saw this diagram, which was the bridge between, it was almost like something about the vagus nerve, how, when you activate the vagus nerve, it gets you from that, fight, flight, freeze into rest, digest, repair. So it's very interesting. And the bridge that I saw, which was very interesting, was social engagement. And I was like, what?
Socialize, yeah, because well, there's safety in numbers.
Yeah, so because when you're like expressing to somebody very deeply, or when you're getting to that level of like I can trust them, like the safety factor that you mentioned, right? Like when you get to that safety and that trust, then you automatically let go of that tension or that threat, right? Like someone's out to get me, or that mentality of like dog eat dog, competition mentality. And
Hmm.
that's I feel like that competition mentality, in a certain aspect it can be healthy, however when it goes past a certain point it starts to create like disharmony, wars start to happen, and all this
Yep.
stuff. So
And that's where the actual failure of the masculine detail take, that's where it comes into play, because now there's not a sturdy enough container to hold it, right? Any We are deities with amnesia. Anything you give to a god is good to a god. It is ingredients in unhealthy doses without parameters that leads to the mess. If you have soup and you try to hold it in a napkin, probably not going to be a beneficial experience, right? Alternatively, if you're trying to eat a candy bar out of a bowl, that also may not be the most productive method of action. And so it comes down to the situation where we just have been mishandling something that has always existed. And rather than pay attention to our methods, which requires us to pay attention to ourselves, and most of us, especially in modern day society, we're so distracted. We are classically trained to look outside of ourselves for the answers. When the reality of the situation is, you've been mishandling yourself, because your external world, that which you perceive, is usually just a reflection of your internal environment. If you mishandle you, you're probably going to mishandle everything else. Hurt people.
absolutely, but also free people, right?
Exact case in point. And ironically enough, it's still the same energy. The free folk just apply it differently. And that begins fundamentally with the way that freedom relates, because it operates from a love space. Love expands, fear contracts, fear separates.
Yeah, and that awareness of what's going on, and the inner work, or the work as we call it nowadays, after Byron Katie came along and sort of like made it a thing.
The work.
Work.
Yeah, right.
uh it's a very interesting thing because, yeah, when you're speaking about the container, almost imagine like, yeah, our bodies are the ultimate container, and sometimes we hold memories that are so heavy that don't, or they're dense and trapped, and we don't do anything with it, and it rots away. Is
The
this
body keeps score.
body keeps score, man? And yeah, that's a really important aspect, specifically of if you're going to do shadow work, right? It's about looking under the rug, under the hood of the car, right? What you've hidden, and that stuff is
That phantom back and neck pain may not just be because you have a sore back or neck. It's statistically, there's a very good chance that it's attached to a memory, and that's just where your body put it.
yeah, that's what I've been experiencing for this past week or so. I would say almost 2 weeks now, a month. And Yeah, man, I've been listening to this subliminal. It's a subliminal program, so basically it takes you through this process. But the whole first 30 days is like a total trauma breakdown, right? So it takes you through. If you listen every day, you're gonna get moments of like you going really into your past, but all the synchronicities that come up in your mind and in throughout your day are supposed to trigger you and basically get you to face your own shit. So I've been doing that.
Yeah, man, triggers are awesome when you use them right.
What's that?
So triggers are awesome when you use them correctly,
Right.
because that all that is a flashlight. It's letting you know, like, there's a nerve here. That nerve is attached to something. You're still tethered. Every trigger is an opportunity for you to surrender, release, accept, embrace. Either way, you got to pay attention or pay the invoice of not paying attention, which usually accrues a compound interest and is way more expensive. So,
Yeah.
your bills.
Yeah, for sure, man. You got to pay your dues. Uh, that's very interesting. And what you were speaking to earlier in terms of, how a lot of it is these lower chakra issues, right? That men are dealing with in a sense of like not really being so grounded and rooted. Um, However, would you also say that that is very, in a sense, masculine because it's, again, attached to the earth? Um,
Absolutely. You can't build a house without foundation.
mhm,
Like, masculine energy consolidates.
yeah.
Um, Feminine energy is what expands and liberates.
Hmm.
But you can't you need the foundation before you get the roof. Because if feminine energy doesn't feel safe, you can't liberate.
Right.
So that's where you see, especially here in America, like whenever the economy tanks or there's something that disturbs the general peace, using that heavily in quotes. I don't know that our society has been in peace at all since its inception, but you get the point, right? Case in point, when the pandemic broke out and everything was in quarantine, firearm sales went up like 400%, which is ironic because I don't remember COVID being big enough to shoot. But the idea behind owning a weapon creates a semblance of there's something I can do. There's something tangible that I can take into my own hands today, right now. I can do a thing. Masculine energy wants to do shit. It wants artifacts. It wants hard results. It wants outcomes.
Yeah, man. And what just came for me right now, I'm just got to download in terms of this, is this idea of like discipline and how in culture we associate discipline with like punishment a lot of times. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
associated with a lack of self-care, you could say, like almost like a drill sergeant hustle
Yeah.
mentality.
Almost like it's supposed to suck.
Yeah, exactly. But the original word, if you look up discipline, it comes from the word disciple, right, which is very sacred.
Yeah.
So if we can go back to that word origin and start to see our rituals as more sacred, right? Our routines as rituals, in a sense, our chores as missions. Um, that really starts to make things a lot easier and smoother for us and flow, right? Because I think even Jocko Willink said the idea of like discipline is freedom, right? Because if you have creativity without boundaries or constraints, you're
It's
gonna
just soup and a paper towel.
exactly soup in a paper. I love that analogy. I'm gonna go back to that for sure. Soup in a paper towel, right? Um, yeah, man. So speaking to that, the idea of discipline and sort of changing that culture around that mentality of like you never give up, always push, like the motivational videos that you see on YouTube. That's kind of just like very.
Yeah, definitely went through that stage.
It's playing.
Definitely.
I feel like it's playing to a specific part of the brain or of like a specific archetype of the warrior of the man that it's sort of like.
Ooh, keep going. Yeah. Let's talk about these archetypes, bro. Let's talk about these archetypes.
And it sort of hijacks that, right? And it's interesting
Yeah.
to bring up archetypes. I mean, because you did mention the multidimensional man, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the way that I've seen it is like the king is almost like the container for the rest of the archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that's like the base. In my program, it's interesting, man. I take people through the chakras, and I've associated an archetype to each of the chakras. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yo, that's fancy business, man.
So yeah, basically that I can go through it real brief if I can pull
Oh
it up.
yeah, nah, lace us with that. That's OG. You know what I mean? I might want to implement that. We don't have to have a conversation offline.
Yeah, for sure. So it starts off with king being the root, right? The earth, the king in
Mm-hmm.
his fullness. Then I talk about the shadow king, which is the tyrant, and then the dormant king, which is the weakling.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
The high
and
chair tyrant, as it's in the young male iteration of it.
then we have, actually, I can type in like this: week 2, week 3. That's how I can find them because we take it week by week, right? So uh, let me see here. Actually, let me just type in archetype and then I can pull up all of them. Warrior. Warrior is solar plexus, so that's week 3. There was a diagram as well that I made for this specifically
Mm-hmm.
um, that just shows you like how it evolves because we can't suddenly hop to the mystic, right? It's like I feel like it works through the process of you actually going with the king, building the foundation, and moving through these archetypes in that way, right? So that's kind of how I saw it. So yeah,
Yeah,
um,
you can't. You're going to start constructing a house by building the roof.
mhm, right.
Respect the process.
So basically it goes lover, so king, then lover, which is the sacral, then it goes
Mm-hmm.
into the warrior, which is the solar plexus, then the heart is the jester, and then it goes into the like the aura what was it, the oracle or the orator, like the person who speaks basically.
Throat chakra.
Yeah. And then it goes into the mystic, and then finally into, I believe it's the sage. Or but yeah, I have to
Mm-hmm.
revisit it. But basically, I've split it up in that way. I used to focus on the childhood ones too, like the divine child, the precocious child, all this kind of stuff. But it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of getting way too complicated, so I just basically boiled it down to the main chakras.
Well, yeah. There are levels. There are levels. We got to decide. It's up to the participant to decide how deep they want to go, right?
Exactly right. But yeah,
Yeah, no, you just show them water. It's up to them to decide the depth.
exactly, man. So that's the way that I've sort of structured it, and also it's interesting how it relates to the scales of consciousness, right? Because uh, the scale of consciousness from David R. Hawkins from Power versus Force, he has this like chart which goes all the way from shame all the way into enlightenment, right? So, and the midpoint is that neutrality. And what's interesting is that he says that from 200 upwards, which is courage, you
Mm-hmm.
the truth, which is energy expansive, and below courage, you go into falsehood, right? Which is basically energy draining. So yeah, that's such an interesting model too, and I think that's another way for people to tap into the flow because you want to start out from, first of all, acknowledging, right, like what is already there before we start to add new upgrades to this avatar, right? Like I have this process on week 8 where we do a character integration. So it's like, how can
Yeah,
you be like, the conductor, the person in the boardroom who brings all of these archetypes together and just be pure awareness, uh, which is basically like you pausing the video game for a second just to
mm-hmm.
enjoy just watching. Right?
I love it. I love that's what it is. It's disassociation with the character. We are an avatar, right? This shit. This is a car. Like we're ghosts riding around in cars made of flesh and
Facts.
bone.
That's quotable.
Like to live is to haunt. So Um, I think the sooner we find ways to continually remind ourselves that none of this is really real, or more accurately, this is not the only thing that is real. There is more. We are more. This is but one iteration of our expression. A lot of things just simply become simpler. They do.
One thing that you said that's kind of reverberating for me right now is the idea that, you know, we are gods with amnesia. Like we just forgot. We are the king that went dormant, you
Hmm.
know? And so coming back to that truth and that realignment, you could say remembering, coming back to our member or dicks. And fun,
Listen, that's don't talk. Don't underestimate the importance of the dick, bro. Penis power is a thing. That is sacred too. Sorry, continue.
there's a reason why in Tantra they call it the magic wand, right? It's like there's a lot into that.
Listen,
There's a lot for sure. And I was speaking into, you know, this understanding of how I could tap into more of a a yang or a dominant energy. And I asked one of my friends about this because he carries that energy very well, you know, and he's sort of like he settles shit, he says shit like he means it, you know, straight line system, Jordan Belfort style, you know, like boom, boom, boom.
yeah, he
And
puts it on the table. That's it.
exactly. And what's interesting is what came up for me because I was doing shadow work, you know, during this period too, is I'll use humor as a crutch to basically not be in my feeling or in my sexuality, right? So if I post like let's say a sexual meme, I'll try to make it funny rather than just purely have it be sexual, right? In a sense, like I can't be with the comfortability of it just being that, you know, I have to add humor on top of that so people will accept the fact that it's a sex meme or something like that, right? So that's an interesting thing that came up for me during this process, and I was like, oh shit, there's always more to uncover, you know, there's always like every level brings a new devil, you know, it's like that
Hmm.
is yeah. What do you
Of
have to,
our own creation, by the way.
yeah, what do you have to say about this idea of like humor as a crutch, or even what I mentioned about, you know, this
Absolutely. Sarcasm was that for me.
Mhm.
Humor at a certain point in life, and then it became sarcasm. And a lot of that was like self-protection because I didn't want to be disappointed. And so like sarcasm was my way of like creating a couple of layers of distance between myself and whatever the it in question was. Then that way, if things didn't go the way that I really wanted them to, I didn't feel that bad because I wasn't overly invested.
Mm, that's interesting how you mention it almost creating this distance, right? Rather
Hmm.
than it being, because humor usually like is used to release and get people to release tension, right? And it's a social lubricant at times. But when you use it with a weak intention, or I guess,
You can. It's a fear-based intention for sure.
yeah, yeah, it's a fear-based intention because it's protective, right? It's like the armoring that we have.
Absolutely. Like we cool, but I don't really fuck with you like that. Like I don't know that I can trust you. You know what I mean? And so to make sure that everybody stays cool, because when people lose their cool, things get hot. And when it gets hot, sometimes you get burnt. So, it was a very effective people management strategy because it did put them at ease. And then that way I didn't have to worry about having to pull up my own weapons, so to speak. Um, like then eventually I can be a bit more relaxed in the space, right? Because you're already disarmed. But the intentions were purely based on self-preservation. Well, not purely, but also based on self-preservation. I also enjoy making people smile, but it's like I enjoy making you smile because laughter is great. I also enjoy making you smile because when you're laughing, I know I have less to worry about.
Mm. Yeah, very powerful. And that plays into the idea of the gesture as well. When there is, let's say we grow up in a household where laughter isn't allowed, and we start to
Mm-hmm.
repress it, or the complete opposite, where we're just being like the entertainer, right? The dancing monkey, try to people please. This is what I wanted to bring up, man, is the masculine, feminine, if we just take these archetypes as these wounded archetypes, right? And we see them at their extreme level, I think the divine feminine manifests through this people pleaser wound, like wanting to be liked, and the masculine one gets into this control freak,
Wanting to be respected.
wanting to be respected, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah,
Well,
that's
because in being liked, there is acceptance, and once again, safety in numbers. Like the feminine wants to connect, wants to engage, right? Like the masculine typically wants to affect. I want to know that something that I say and or do matters.
mm,
Like that's the compulsion with the legacy. What am I leaving behind? What will people remember me for?
totally. I mean, that's been the journey for me. I did the Jungian analysis, and my archetype was the outlaw, right? And I saw
Mm.
that the outlaw just wants to leave a mark, and the thing he struggles with the most is that vulnerability factor, and that showed up again in my attachment styles quiz, fearful avoidant, and I was like, oh shit, these patterns keep repeating themselves. You know what I mean? Every single map gets you clearer on what to do next. That's why I think self knowledge is like place to go.
So now that begs the question of why are we always surrounded by screens and distractions?
Mm-hmm. Right, to take us away from ourselves.
Can't get you to spend money on shit you don't need if you know you don't need it.
mm. I hope the audience is just integrating everything you're saying, JD, because it's very potent stuff, man, and it takes a lot for people to really come to this understanding and this truth. There's a lot of deep concepts that we mentioned here, but I want to leave it at this. If you could yell through a megaphone, have the universe hear one message that you want to, you know, yell across the cosmos, what would you say?
Give thanks.
Mm, beautiful.
Thank you is a complete prayer.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate you for being here. And may we never be the same again. May we remember who we fucking are.
That part
All
sounds like the beginning of a really good love letter or the end of marriage vows. I don't know, but
right. Yeah, man. That's great. All right, brother. May the flow be with you. Take care of yourself. And yeah, let's continue this conversation at a later date.
absolutely. Likewise, we definitely have more to tap into. Please don't forget that part about the well, you can stop the recording first. But yeah, peace.